Okay. Well, am I on? I wasn't in theater. Am I on? Am I on? Live? Okay, thank you. Good evening and welcome to the first Say No to Data Centers meeting, No to Data Centers in Wise County meeting. We're going to get started, even though we anticipate more people coming. They'll come in quietly and take seats. We're live streaming tonight and we're also videotaping. So those folks who can't get to the meeting because of prior commitments will be able to watch it on YouTube. My name is Lee DeMontenay, and my allergies are driving me crazy. I was born and raised in Virginia, Blacksburg to be exact, even though I don't sound like it. In 2020, after almost 50 years, my husband and I decided to I talked my husband into coming back to Virginia, and we intentionally chose Southwest Virginia for the quiet beauty of the Appalachian Mountains. Imagine my surprise a few weeks ago when I discovered that Virginia leads the state, leads the nation in data centers with a whopping 665 operational data centers in our state. Texas has 400 and something, California's third with 300. We are the highest. That's the bad news. The good news is in Virginia, support for data centers has collapsed from 69% 3 years ago to 35% currently. Prince William County officially abandoned the Digital Gateway, a massive 2,100-acre, 37-building campus that was set to be one of the world's largest data center developments. A $1 billion plan, 550-acre data center east of Richmond was shelved in August of 2025. And nearly 50% of U.S. data centers planned for 2026 have either been scrapped or delayed. Now, let's meet our presenters. Two of our presenters have arrived. We're waiting for the third one. He should be here shortly. Sharon?
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? As Leah said, there is growing and wide resistance to data centers across Virginia and the country, especially from rural communities. Among the coal counties in Southwest Virginia, Wise County has become the center of proposals, plans, and especially funding. The information I am presenting has been compiled from press releases, news articles, websites, and lots of research. There are gaps in what we know, as the main issue is lack of transparency. So there are two locations in Wise County where data center developments appear to be going on. I'm going to use my pointer here just for a moment, see if you can see it. Here and here. Okay. Here in the western part area, which is bordering the eastern Kentucky coal counties, this is the location in what is being called Data Center Ridge. How many of you heard of Data Center Ridge? Only a few of you, okay. And in the area I pointed to, right almost in the center, okay, that is a heavily populated area It's the Lonesome Pine Regional Business and Technology Park. And the Mineral Gap Data Center is located there now. And it currently is the only data center in Wise County. Now, data centers have created 3 issues and concerns for residents: land, water, and energy. This kind of says it all. 78% of the land in Wise County has large absentee land ownership, paying 13% of the taxes. And by the way, this data is being compiled by the University of Kentucky. The largest outside landowners are Penn, Virginia, the United States Forest Service, and the Nature Conservancy's Cumberland Forest Project. Wise County's IDA, Industrial Development Authority, has said that they only have access for development to 4% of the land in the county, which also means there's not land available for residents, businesses to also access. This is definitely an issue for a reform. Now, this is the western part of the county, okay? And it is here in the western part where Data Center Ridge is supposedly to be located. It's on 65,000 acres that are owned by a company called Energy Transfer. They're a natural gas and pipeline company in Texas, and this land is managed by the Penn, Virginia operating company. So sometimes you hear Energy Transfer, sometimes Penn, Virginia. They're both associated with that land. Penn, Virginia, how many of you heard of Penn, Virginia? Yeah, I figured that, more than Data Center Ridge. Longtime historical landowner in all of Appalachia, because that company owns 250,000 acres in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Virginia. Now, in 2023, the governor of Virginia announced he called it a big deal, wherein an agreement would be made between Wise County, Penn, Virginia, and Energy Delta to develop land on these 65,000 acres. Using a FOIA request, we found that the agreement no longer exists as Energy Transfer has pulled out of the big deal. And we have no more information about that. Now, Energy Delta. Who or what is Energy Delta? In 2019, Virginia created the Southwest Virginia Energy Research and Development Authority. Everything's long names. Its chair has and may still be a coal baron. By the way, a New York Times article focused recently on how coal barons still greatly influence our local economies, whether it's through casinos, landfills, or data centers and nuclear energy. The Research and Development Authority then set up Delta, Energy Delta, as a nonprofit. I'm sorry about that. Shouldn't move my hands. They set it up as a nonprofit, but now when you go to the website, that operation says it is a private entity. Again, lots of questions come to mind that we don't have answers for. Now, there are 2 advisors, managers for the authority and Delta, and each one of them set up their own private consulting firm as soon as they came on board to work with public monies. This, by the way, is a schematic that they have had on their website for several years. This is what supposedly Data Center Ridge is going to look like. But we're not ever talking about one data center. We're talking about clusters of data centers. How many of you have been or out to see Mineral Gap Data Center? Okay, a few of you have. Well, this is a drawing of the Mineral Gap Data Center, and it's located on Airport Road outside of the town of Wise. It too is located in the Lonesome Pine Regional Business and Technology Park. Now, if you will notice there on the back, you see the building and then you see smaller, looks like buildings. That's a line of diesel generators. Diesel generators are backup power for data centers, which also gets its electricity from the grid. That's where we all get our electricity, and that's a major issue. And there are solar panels there. This rendition does not show that the data center is across the road from the Wise Christian School, and beside it is a call center. By the way, call centers are not data centers. It is documented that diesel generators pollute the air. Now, just down the road, this is still going to be part of the Lonesome Pine Regional Business and Technology Park, is the proposed Elam Farm Data Center Complex. Now, this is a picture before it was developed. The Elam farmland is on a former mine site and is now shovel-ready for constructing data centers, having been reclaimed with federal dollars called AMBLR funds, which specifically are to work with reclaimed mine land. The plan is to build a data center complex with 9 data centers here, with energy provided by on-site natural gas-fired generation. Now, this will be what is called behind-the-meter energy source, serving only data centers, not the residents of Wise County. So again, a gas plant just to serve the data centers. By the way, natural gas generation is another pollutant. Now, water for the data centers here at Elam Farm, we have been told from authority that it will be the town of Wise reservoir with backup from water from the county's Public Service Authority, the PSA. Now, 2 companies, Red Post Energy, another oil and gas company in Texas, that's where Energy Transfer is, and Wise Innovation Hub, a data center developer in Northern Virginia. So Red Post Energy, gas company, Wise Innovation Hub, it's interesting they did the Wise, a data center developer. And they have signed an agreement to design the gas plant infrastructure. Now, Wise County's IDA director says Red Post is the most environmentally conscious company he has encountered. By the way, Red Post formed a year ago. It's a brand new company. So I will admit that it galled me a bit when I read the CEO of Red Post say about construction here, it's just hills and dirt. As with all data centers, they come with promises of jobs and revenues. Let's see. Okay. So let's follow the money. In the past few years, millions of dollars, you see the figure there? Getting close to $25 million that we have documented. There could be more. Millions of dollars for developing data centers and SMRs. Who's heard of SMRs? Okay. These are called small modular nuclear reactors. And these dollars are to develop those and other forms of energy, and the money primarily comes from federal government, AMBLR funds, I've mentioned the Department of Energy, and state funds like the Virginia Department of Energy, and under that is called the Virginia Clean Energy Innovation Bank. And then regional money, the Tobacco Commission, most people have heard of the Tobacco Commission, set up 30-some years ago as a settlement. Go Virginia Region 1 and VCEDA. VCEDA, most people, again, around here may have heard of. It's the Virginia Virginia Coalfield Economic Development Authority. I've got an extra E in there. And those are more regional, local funding that has been provided. Now, I want to clarify this. These dollars are not Wise County government revenues. Now, Wise County is in a financial crisis. The Board of Supervisors have been spending more than they are collecting. But these millions of dollars have been directed for what some people have called speculative projects. Little has been accomplished, something you can see, over the past 7 years, except for some site developments on formerly mined land and studies. Consultants love studies. I have a data background. I love studies too, but we'll look at some of the studies here. So let me mention a few of the expenditures. Project Oasis laid out a plan in 2020 to market data centers to coal fields using abandoned mine land and using water from abandoned mines. So in 2023, it was actually about 6 months later, that was 2020. In 2023, the SMR site feasibility study identified 7 locations, but not located on isolated land, far from populated areas as had been first hyped, but in areas near residents, schools, churches, and businesses. One of those 7 sites was located near Red Onion Prison. And in that study, they mentioned you probably might want an evacuation plan, should it come to that. Okay. Then in 2024, there was an SMR supply chain study looking to see if the coal fields could be part of creating, supplying parts when SMRs are finally operable. The head of Virginia's nuclear lobby said last month, Gina and I were there, that SMRs would not be commercially available until 2033. When this first started, we heard 10 years out. There are no operating SMRs in the country. Then in 2025, and continuing now into 26, a microreactor study is underway. Now, how many of you know what a microreactor is? Okay, I see one, okay. Microreactors are smaller than small modular, okay? Now, these are all expenditures. Part of that almost 25 million are given to do all these studies and things. This past December, the UVA College at Wise was awarded $275,000 to purchase a nuclear reactor control simulator, and it's not for gaming. The stated purpose was to train workers. The college does not have a nuclear program or faculty in this field, but the college administration has been involved in funding the 3 studies I have mentioned. Now, in January of this year, Congressman Griffith announced $1.4 million to go to Energy Delta to explore the potential for advanced nuclear reactors on former coal mine lands and the effects that may have of using water to cool nuclear reactors. Now, I want to say here, you're hearing a lot about SMRs right now. I want to say here, the reason our grassroots movement, which is now 3.5 years old, is called Southwest Virginia Nuclear Watch, is because residents were shocked to hear the governor say in 2022 that he wanted the first SMR, maybe in the world, to be in the coal fields. But then as we started looking into it and doing our research, we learned it was all about data centers and much more. So SMRs would eventually, it's proposed, to be the energy source for nuclear reactors here. Now, both federal and state funds have awarded millions of dollars to study blue hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. How many have heard of those? Okay, a few of you have. To create energy from blue hydrogen, you need natural gas. And to transport captured carbon, you either need to truck it or build pipelines. We don't have it here tonight, but the Virginia Department of Energy a couple of years ago put out a map, and it showed a proposed hydrogen hub and a carbon capture and storage facility in what appears to be the Blackwood Industrial Park area between Norton and Appalachia. And the Wise County IDA has just purchased 23 more acres in that park, by the way, funded by VCEDA. Now, data centers come with promises of tax revenues and jobs. We hear that. Some of the job numbers thrown at us have been exorbitant, like over 1,600 here. Some come with short-term construction jobs. These are jobs, and they are, but they're short-term to construct data centers. But very few jobs are permanent or full-time. 7 of us met with Senator Pillion last week, and we were discussing these different issues, and he even said, nah, most of the jobs are in construction. The IDA director has said the jobs that he would expect here would mostly be security, maintenance, and some trades, but few, if any, high-paying, high-tech jobs. And that's from our IDA director. Now, we're talking about funding here. Wise County and the surrounding coal counties have set an equipment tax on data centers at 24 cents per $100 assessed and bragged that it is the lowest tax rate in the state. This compares to Loudoun County, very northern Virginia, which has collected more than $4 per 100 assessed, 24 cents versus $4. Loudoun County already has around 200 data centers, and believe me, it's become very controversial in Northern Virginia, where most of the current data centers are located. In fact, Loudoun County is called Data Center Alley. The reasoning for the low tax rate is it would draw data centers here. You got a real low tax rate. However, we were recently told by authority that that hasn't proven to be true. That data centers really wouldn't come here for that particular equipment tax rate. So it would be basically lost revenue for the county. Now, you probably can't read this. It's a long list. This is what we the people are up against. This is a list of agencies and organizations made up of politicians and special interests. The one at the very top, the Virginia Nuclear Energy Consortium, is a statewide nuclear lobby organization. And the bottom one, Data Center Coalition, is a nationwide association for data center lobbying. But then we can go, I had Governor Youngkin's administration, because at the time we put this together, much, but not all, of this had happened under former Governor Youngkin. Now, will the new administration be any different? So on here, you start with the governor's office, the Department of Energy, that Virginia Clean Energy Innovation Bank, which was one of the funders down here. There's a thing, this is rather new, the Virginia Innovative Nuclear Hub. All our politicians are two national senators, Warner, Kane, our Congressman Griffith, and almost all of our Southwest Virginia delegates and senators are for data centers and nuclear. Then you have our planning, Lenawisco Planning District, the Wise County Board of Supervisors, the Southwest Virginia Research and Development Authority I mentioned earlier, Energy Delta, a marketing firm called Invest Virginia, which was set up by the Tobacco Commission. I can't find anything about that right now. I don't know where that is. Mountain Empire Community College, the UVA College at Wise, are all have been involved in promoting nuclear and data centers. Then we have Coalfield Strategies and Virginia Energy Strategies. Those are two private consulting firms that I mentioned earlier, and they are the advisors and managers that are really, all of their work is over in the Data Center Ridge area. Go Virginia Region 1, funding, Tobacco Commission funding, VCETA funding, and again, these are all the entities that we are up against. So I mentioned, will the current administration be any different? Right now, Virginia's new budget is in dispute. Now you're going to hear different numbers. They were saying $1.9 billion, not millions now, but $1 billion are the total tax exemption giveaway for data centers in Virginia right now. And it is growing each year as new data centers are being incentivized to come here. Now, where this is, and it's happening, the General Assembly is supposed to get back together tomorrow and then meet on the 23rd. In our meeting with Senator Pillion, he thought it would be June 30th before it would settle. So we'll see if that is true or not. Now, I'm getting in the weeds here, but this is what is happening right now. The Senate bill wants to end the tax exemption to data centers and put those dollars in service to people, such as childcare, healthcare, education, increasing teachers' pay, reducing electric bills. However, we've got to ask, will Governor Spanberger support the people or large corporations. We're talking Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, Facebook, and each one of those companies is worth trillions of dollars. Folks, we need to come together and we need to resist.
Jenny, hold on. I want a minute to introduce you. I did not do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me, Wally, when you start, here's the clicker, and your slide should be next. She's going to do one more
I
thing.
forgot
Oh,
something.
yeah, I'll sit over here.
So I just need a moment, just a moment. I'm very sorry. I'm remiss. I meant to introduce you to the three presenters this evening. You just heard from Sharon Fisher. She's the president of the Clinch Coalition and coordinator with the Southwest Virginia Nuclear Watch Coalition and Grassroots Movement. Wally Smith, who has just arrived, is a Soil and Water Director for Wise County with the Lonesome Pine Soil and Water Conservation District. And Jenny Turman is the Associate Professor of History at UVA-Wise and author of the forthcoming book, The New Decentralists, The Back to the Land Movement and the Politics of Localism in Appalachia, 1968 to 2000. Now we'll hear from Wally.
Thank you. I already screwed up the presentation. Let me see if I can get it pulled back up. I think that was me at least. Yeah, and I can click through. There we go. So thank y'all, and sorry for coming in late. I was coming from a local government meeting down the road and then ran out of there and then came over here, so I'm glad I made it in time. But as she said, my name's Wally Smith. If y'all don't know me, some of y'all may know me through my day job. So I work at UVA-Wise. I'm not affiliated with some of the projects that you've been hearing about tonight through that role. I'm an ecologist and conservation biologist there. So for my day job, I study the impacts of land use and land use policy on Appalachian ecosystems. So there's obviously a lot of overlap with what we're discussing here tonight with that. And I'm also one of your elected officials if you do live in Wise County. So I am a Soil and Water Conservation Director. A lot of folks have no idea what that means, and that's totally fine because we're not really in the same plane as the Board of Supervisors, that kind of thing. What we actually do is we're elected to represent local citizens and conservation issues. So if you're an agricultural producer, a lot of what we do is fund programs to assist private landowners, folks that farm, with erosion issues, stormwater issues, but then also we have this role to represent y'all when a conservation issue comes up. So in addition to me talking tonight, I'm not going to tell you what to think necessarily here, but I would like to hear from y'all, and I'll have some more information here in a couple of minutes about how you can engage with me, and hopefully some of your other elected officials as well that have different roles in the county tonight. And I will mention through that elected role that I have, again, if you haven't heard about what we do, we don't have any kind of regulatory authority. So the Soil and Water Board that I sit on, we don't manage drinking water, we don't manage sewer, that's groups like the PSA. We don't make or enforce laws, so we're more of an advisory group. So when it comes to a data center, some of the other projects that I'll mention, when those come up, we don't have to approve those. So we're kind of in a weird kind of gray area when it comes to how regulations work, but part of our job is to inform the decision makers when they do make those decisions. So that's kind of where my background is and where I'm coming from. But what I thought I would talk about, I know Sharon set the stage about some of the issues that we're seeing here in the region right now. I thought I would talk about kind of in the world that I work in, both with the Soil and Water Director position and then also my day job as a college professor, the idea of community engagement and public engagement, because this is something that is completely relevant to what we're talking about here tonight when it comes to any kind of public governance work. Public engagement is a really core part of that, just making sure that the public's voice, local residents' voices are heard in project planning and especially the implementation of big projects. Whether it's a data center or a local park, regardless of the topic, the public deserves a voice in some of those decisions. So I thought I would open with the image that you see here that is not mine, so I don't want to take credit for this. This actually comes from Johns Hopkins University, so it's more of a public health school slide, but I think that a lot that is shown up here speaks to how public engagement works. I know it's kind of busy, but what you're seeing here is the idea that community engagement or public engagement really is a spectrum. It's not a question of whether you're doing it or whether you're not. There are varying degrees of it, and as you can see up here, going from, I guess, your left over to the right, you're looking at different degrees of public engagement that can exist, where the lowest level of public engagement over to the left, if the public is being engaged at all, is where you're simply informing as a public official or a government body what you're doing. You may not be necessarily asking for input from the public, but instead you're saying, here's a decision that we've made, we're making you aware of it, maybe if you have questions, reach out to us, that sort of approach. And then on the far right side of that spectrum is a really high level of public engagement where the community itself actually leads in the decision-making process. So you're not learning about something from a press release, you're not learning about it from, a grand announcement by an elected official. Instead, you're actually involved from the ground level when those decisions are made. And you can see up here as well, there's kind of shades of gray between those, where there are varying levels, varying stages, where the public can be involved in any kind of public decision that's made at the local level. This also happens at the state and federal level too. So this spectrum can hold, basically across all levels of public life and all levels of public governance. So I think, maybe a good example, excuse me, or an illustration of how that can or cannot work and kind of where we sit on this spectrum is what we saw a few years ago when some of the first announcements happened about the county and the local planning district exploring the possibility or the feasibility of locating nuclear reactors here in the region. I pulled this map from the feasibility study that came from Winnewisco back in 2013. And I will stress that, this map is not saying definitively that a reactor has been proposed for all of those locations, but what you're seeing is the map that was produced through that feasibility study saying these are locations that were evaluated for the possible feasibility of, would it be suitable to eventually site nuclear reactors here in the region. And I bring this up because, the way that a lot of us, including me, as somebody who was just starting an elected term when this all came out, the way I first found out about this was from the news. So there were no local meetings held, there was no meeting like this where the public was brought together and any public official said, hey, as a heads up, we're exploring this is something we would like to do, we would like your input. That simply didn't happen. And that feasibility analysis really happened with no general public meetings like this. There was some input sought, there was a stakeholder survey that was performed as a part of that study, but it was very selective and exclusive, meaning that only a certain list of people were allowed to provide input for that study. And then when that came out, as y'all know, if you follow this issue back in the press a few years ago, both local and state officials at different times repeatedly claimed that public input was really unnecessary because we were just looking at the feasibility of locating nuclear energy here. But obviously, as you see back here, there's a lot else that can be done when it comes to even a basic feasibility study. So I would argue that, throughout that whole process, where we were kind of sitting was over to the far left of this graph, maybe even off of the far left of that graph, where the public was informed, but a lot of those early decisions, at least when it came to the feasibility study here with nuclear, were kind of made behind closed doors, and then those decisions were handed down to the public a little bit later. And I think in a lot of ways, I missed a little bit of Sharon's remarks, but we're seeing that with data centers as well. When these decisions happen, we're learning about them through a news article, not learning about them through, a general town hall meeting like this where questions and a dialogue are allowed. So, that has kind of been my concern, both as a local citizen and then also as an elected official is, can we get more public involvement and more public voice? Because I think just through the world that I work in, that's how we make better decisions. When we've got more input, we've got more people involved on the front end, that's how we find solutions to really complex problems. So just wanted to show y'all kind of a quick roadmap of how I think this works, like in a perfect world, how I would love to see public engagement with any kind of decision making, whether again, it's a data center, something related to energy, even just public parks or trails, stuff that's relatively non-controversial. And that's kind of what you're seeing up here, just to walk you through this flow chart. There's always going to be an initial concept or an idea. So, some individual, maybe an outside firm may have an idea that they think could benefit a local community. And then typically in a perfect world, what you would see before any decisions were ever made is some kind of public scoping process where the question is asked, is this concept or is this idea viable? And then is it also needed? Is it something the community actually wants? Do we have consent for that here? If we do have consent, how's it going to benefit the community? And that's usually done in several ways, kind of down below that second box. I put some of the avenues through which that usually happens with media notices, in the newspaper, local television stations, radio, then some public info meetings, just like we're doing here tonight. Ideally, you would have some kind of public official that is not me because I have no decision-making authority, but maybe somebody with that authority up here leading a discussion, maybe an outside facilitator. There's folks who do that for their jobs that can come in and facilitate those kind of discussions. And then also coupled with that, some kind of public input mechanism. So a way, even outside of a meeting like this, if you go home and you've got a question, a concern, or an idea for the decision makers, having some kind of mechanism to formally get that information in front of them so it's recorded and it becomes part of the project planning, that usually is the best practice for this kind of project planning that happens across a lot of the country. And then from there, kind of moving over to that third box, you've got the analysis stage where maybe the whole community is not involved initially, but what you'll have is the project leadership team, maybe some representatives from the community, like a focus group, come together, look at all that input that they got from the community, and then see, what is the community saying? What are their concerns? How do they think this would help the community? How do they think, it might hurt the community? What issues may it cause? And then I put a little kind of feedback loop there, because ideally what you would do is after you do that analysis, kind of refine your plan, go back to the community with it. You may have to do that several times, but as you do it, you're gradually getting more and more info that gives you a better and better plan. And then eventually at the end of that process, the handshake over there simply shows the decision and implementation where, maybe not everybody in the community is happy with that decision, but at least they've been aware of how that decision-making process works. I think that's usually, kind of the gold standard for any kind of civic planning, regardless of what the topic is. So that's what I would love to see, and that does happen with a lot of projects. Some of y'all are familiar with like the Forest Service around here and how they do projects. They go through scoping very similar to this. Just like I was saying before, not everybody agrees with the final decision that's made, but the process that lets you get there very often gives the public multiple opportunities for input and to object. The decision makers have to listen to that input, and a lot of times you come out with a better plan than what you started with when you follow that process. So that would be great, but instead I think, kind of what we've seen here with the data center decision, a lot of the nuclear decisions up till now as well, is kind of what I've called the country club model of civic planning, where you do have maybe some scoping, you have that initial idea or project concept. There's some kind of analysis and decision-making process that happens, but I call it the country club model. That's not like an official term or anything, but when the scoping happens a lot of times under this model, the public isn't aware that there's even been an idea proposed. And instead, there's closed-door meetings. It's a very secretive process where a very strategic list of stakeholders are allowed in the room and allowed to provide input. Very often here, what I've seen personally is that some elected officials, I'm often not allowed in the room as one of those officials. Industry VIPs, politically connected nonprofits, won't name any names, but some groups have more political connections than others, and they're allowed to provide input. And then also our economic development staff, which do play a role as stakeholders, but very often that circle is drawn very tightly around those groups, and discussions happen without the public's knowledge, without those formal mechanisms for people from the community to provide their input. And then that analysis and decision is made before the public ever finds out. And like I was showing back here, all of a sudden we see headlines one day in the Cardinal News, the local newspaper, handing down this decision that no one even knows about. And that, I think, is really where a lot of the public conflict comes from. The public gets caught off guard when people say, well, wait a minute, there's going to be a nuclear reactor at site X or site Y. Even if that hasn't been formally proposed, it's a total surprise to folks when they don't know those sites have been considered. Whereas in a meeting like this, if you're hearing us talk about these kind of things in public, people at least know, and they can get those ideas in front of those decision makers. So, I just bring that up to kind of point out that I think we're kind of to the far left of that spectrum that I showed y'all before, or maybe even off of that. It's a very kind of closed door situation. And something I've heard a good bit when data centers have come up have been public officials saying, well, we can't talk about this because we're under an NDA, a confidentiality agreement. Those do happen. I've worked under those before, but I have never seen an NDA that says you absolutely cannot talk about project blank. You're restricted from speaking about certain proprietary info, but the idea that you just can't talk to the public at all about a project is typically not something that happens. That may be going on here, but it would be, in my view, pretty unusual if that did. So kind of coming back to some projects, I think, where these kind of issues could be addressed with more of this approach, like I was showing back here. are the data centers, which I'll come to in just a second because I know that's the topic of the meeting. But I wanted to bring up one more that could or could not be related to the data center industry. I'm not honestly sure, but it is something that has come up on my radar in the last few weeks to months. It's been a project that has not been proposed by the county. So this is not a Wise County or Lenawisco project. This is something that has been proposed by an outside developer, so a private company. But it kind of followed this process of coming up on folks' radar by surprise. A while back, it was actually proposed, I think, in 2014, I believe. I may be getting the year wrong. But this is a pumped hydro storage facility that has been preliminarily proposed and approved by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I know that's a mouthful, but basically what you want to do if you want to have a large energy project, you have to first file an application that's called a preliminary application or a preliminary permit. This project right now is not moving to construction as far as I'm aware, but this initial permit went out. There was a review process. I'm sure at some point it was announced maybe in a newspaper somewhere. I personally missed that notification. Don't think any public meetings were held, but the idea with this project would be to build a pair of reservoirs. So an upper reservoir or lake, a lower reservoir of lake. And if you know about how pumped hydro storage works, you move that water between those reservoirs, you pump it uphill to the upper reservoir, and then when it flows back down, that helps to generate electricity. So it's not nearly as concerning in terms of air quality, that kind of thing, as combustion, modes of energy generation are. But this has been proposed near the community of Rhoda, if you're familiar with where that is, just down the road, right outside of Appalachia. And I bring it up because there's a lot of potential questions and concerns that I think could be addressed through more of this kind of iterative public planning process where folks are in the room and allowed to provide input throughout the entire development process of this project. Because what it would do, based on the application that was filed, is construct those reservoirs. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they both expressed some serious concern about potential impacts to the Powell River from the construction of this. Looking at their comments, I would personally agree with those. So it would be wonderful to see with this kind of project, this kind of meeting happen where the public could come and express their concern. This would also be relatively close to nearby homes in Rhoda. So I think only a few hundred feet. I may have that figure, a little bit off there. But that lower reservoir that you see on this map would be relatively close to folks that live in that community. And then also, would there be cost to local ratepayers? It's not really clear if this project would serve a utility that we may be paying customers of, or if it would be what we call behind the meter generation, where this would serve something like a data center or private industry. Those are complete unknowns right now, but this is one of several projects in addition to the nuclear projects that I mentioned earlier that I think this kind of more public discussion could really benefit from in terms of figuring out what this project looks like and how it could move forward. And so that brings me to the data centers. Again, obviously this is somewhere, since I've been talking about it, that I think a more publicly engaged process could really benefit. I won't just rehash what's been planned for the data center complex in Wise County, because I know data centers came up in some of Sharon's remarks. But, basically this data center has been proposed, as far as we know from some headlines in the press and some news articles, for the Lonesome Pine Business and Tech Park, which is out near the airport, kind of between the airport and Wise County Christian School, Belden Dotson Park. That's generally the area we're talking about. As far as I'm aware, there have been no official site plans made available yet to know exactly where in the tech part the infrastructure for this data center complex would go. But what has been reported in the press is multiple data center buildings, I believe 9 maybe is the number that has been mentioned, along with some kind of gas generation facility. So they will be burning natural gas or methane to produce electricity, presumably to power these data centers. So again, when you think about that kind of project, it's in a relatively high density area for our part of the world. There's a lot of folks that live nearby. Wise County Christian School is right next door. Mountain Road Vineyards is close, where I spend most of my time at UVA Wise is right there. We've got Heritage Hall that's relatively close as well. There's a lot of different community assets that are really close to this facility. And so some of the questions that I've had as a public official and as a local resident, somebody who could be impacted by this, where I work for my day job, is how would this impact things like air quality? The data centers themselves could be a concern because we know from other data centers elsewhere in the country, there are emergency diesel generators that are used periodically at those data centers. They produce air pollution. There's particulates that come up when they do that. That can decrease air quality. So, would those be operated at these data centers? How often would they be operated? Those are still unknowns. And then in addition, if we're going to have a gas plant associated with this, those are a major concern in terms of air quality, because natural gas is a great form of energy if you're going to burn it to produce electricity. but there are trade-offs with that. So there's air pollution that can come from it, particulate generation. I won't get into the weeds too much with the technical jargon, but the particulate matter is really small particles that are released into the air, very hard to get out of the air through some of the air quality treatment that we have. And if you breathe those in, there's a lot of research that has shown that can cause all sorts of health issues. So these become a major public health concern when they're sited relatively close to high-density areas where folks live. And right now, it kind of varies depending on the literature source that you're looking at with what that health concern would be. But generally speaking, about a half mile to a mile from those gas plants is kind of the radius of concern with folks that are within those. Didn't put the figures up here, but I think the Christian school is just a few hundred feet from the Tech Park boundary. The Mountain Rose Vineyards is very close as well. UVA Wise, the Bear Creek Meadows subdivision, those are all, well within that radius. There would be a lot of potential concern there. And obviously, if we're going to move forward with this, I think we really need that public conversation so that those folks that live in that area can be informed about exactly what the plans are. I can't really make my own informed decision about some of those risks because there's just so few details that have been released other than this plan is happening and the county thinks it will be great. That's certainly their prerogative to have that approach, but we need more details to make some informed decisions about those projects. And then also, since I'm a soil and water director, water quality and quantity is a major issue because, as y'all know, data centers need water for a number of reasons, primarily to cool their infrastructure, so to cool their servers. The technology is advancing a little bit, as I understand it. I'm not an expert on that technology, but if you're not using a closed loop system, if you're pulling water from a public water source or from any natural source, running that through the server rooms, you're cooling off the servers with that water, then you're sending it back. Is that water now warmer than where it started? That's what we call thermal pollution, and that can become a concern for the environment. More concerningly, are there chemicals that are being released into that water? Can those chemicals be appropriately removed when it goes back to wherever that water source is? Again, as far as I know, we know nothing about the particular systems that this proposed data center would use, but that's information that we need, and that's information that the public needs to have a conversation about to make informed decisions, and really figure out what the consequences would be for the county, both in terms of benefits and disadvantages. And right now, all we really have are question marks. So going back to this slide, I really think this approach, as opposed to what we've seen so far, where these decisions kind of get handed down to us, that would really benefit our discussion of this. And I'd be happy to get more into this when we get to the Q&A in a second about, some of the potential issues and the more technical stuff on this side of the data center world. So what I'll wrap up with, and I'll turn over to, I guess, Jenny is next in a second, is what can you do? I know it kind of feels helpless when you're looking at this situation and there's kind of this closed door, kind of very exclusive type of planning that happens with civic projects. I really think the biggest thing you can do is contact your elected representatives, especially your local representatives. So if you're a county resident, know who your representative is on the Board of Supervisors. You may not agree with them, they may not agree with you, but I'll guarantee they do want to hear from you. So, any kind of comment, any kind of feedback you can give them is going to be welcome. The more people they hear it from, the better they can use that decision or that information to make their decisions. And I really think specific questions, if you've got, specific concerns, specific recommendations for projects, that goes a lot more way than just, or it goes a lot farther, a lot more of a way than just general statements of support or opposition. Those are important if you support or don't support a project. But, I support or don't support this project because goes a long way and helps them take information back to their counterparts and make better decisions. So I know a lot of y'all are already doing that, so I'm preaching to the choir, but I think that's the easiest first step you can have is just to be civically engaged that way if we're not having official meetings like this at the county government level. I think that's a great way to get your information in front of folks. And then eventually at some point, I would presume even with a data center project like this, there's going to have to be a public hearing held. At some point there will be some regulatory approvals that have to happen for this kind of project. So when those do, keep an eye out, know those public meetings. It's kind of tough, and this is something I don't like about the process. A lot of times when those public meetings happen, it's too late to really get involved in the early levels of planning, but you can still get involved at those levels. So if that's the only public meeting you get, make sure to go to those, provide input. If there is some kind of scoping, if a permit is applied for, there's an opportunity for the public to comment, do that. Reach out and provide your comment through that official medium, especially through that official medium is important because social media comments, those are important as well but those won't go into the official document of record when that planning happens. So I think, knowing those avenues is really important. And that's something I can help with. One of my jobs, and it actually says this in the director's handbook that we have when we get elected, is when those projects happen, if there's a nexus there, if there's an overlap with soil and water impacts, somebody like me is supposed to go to those meetings and provide comment. I'm supposed to file written comments through that process. So absolutely provide your own comments, but I would love to hear from y'all as well, whether you support or don't support a project. If you've got specific concerns you would like me to echo and me to convey when those opportunities come up, please let me know. My contact information is up here. I would love to hear from y'all. Anytime, even if it's another issue beyond data centers, feel free to reach out. And then also know just what your regulatory processes are going to be, who has to approve a project. So I mentioned FERC back here, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That was one of the reasons I wanted to show this project, is there is kind of a prescribed process that projects like this have to follow. So, knowing who the appropriate group is, who the appropriate body is that has to approve something, I think is critical. And then knowing when through the life of that project do those approvals occur. That can also kind of help you be prepared when those opportunities arise to provide comments that will be most impactful for whatever concerns you have, whatever your needs are. Getting those in front of those groups, I think, is really critical. So I will shut up after that. Hopefully I haven't rambled too much and turn it over to Jenny. Again, if y'all do have questions in the Q&A in a few minutes, more than happy to take those, and I'll stick around once we get to that. But thank y'all.
Okay, I think we're all carrying our water up here because we've been talking about the pollen is so bad right now that, we're kind of coughing a little bit. So, thank you all so much for having me. I'm Jenny Turman. I am a history professor at UVA-Wise, and I actually do specialize in Appalachian history and modern U.S. history, and one of my areas of interest is activism and social movements, which by default means you also have to understand something about how local governments work as well. And so really what I wanted to talk about, I think I was looking at Wally's fabulous slides, and mine are not fabulous. They're really sort of run-of-the-mill, but he did get me thinking about this question of civic engagement, and that is something that I'm going to dive into a little bit. So that's going to be part of it, and then I'm also going to just sort of map out a very, very brief history of Appalachia during and after the industrial period to show you all how this limited decision-making and limited transparency and sort of focusing on one particular economic development plan has sort of transcended centuries. So we can even date that back to really the 1890s. So I'll get into that a little bit. So you all see the title of my particular presentation is Why Data Centers Appear to be the Only Option, right? This is what we hear, like, we don't have anything else. We've got to bring them in. That's our tax revenue. We're losing coal, right? There's this kind of narrative. And of course, if you listen to state officials, if you listen to federal officials, it's all AI. It's got to be AI. It's got to be data centers. This is it, right? There's not talk of, I keep joking with my partner about, like, back in the, when we watch cartoons, the Jetsons, like, where are the flying cars, right? We're supposed to be having flying cars now, right? There's supposed to be all this innovation, and now we just have AI, and that's like the only thing. So why is that? So they are creating the appearance of this being the only thing. And that's one thing I really want to impart upon you all is that I keep mentioning when I go to Board of Supervisors and I speak, I talk about, so I live here in Big Stone, and I talk about all the really interesting things that all of the towns are doing to diversify their economies, but I don't hear that coming from the Board of Supervisors. So there seems to be a disconnect there as well. Even if you look at your town councils and what they're trying to do, it's a little bit different than what the Board of Supervisors may be suggesting. So with that, let's see if I can. Okay, I told you my slides aren't fancy. But as any good historian would do, there is a wonderful array of scholarship out there if you all want to learn more. And a couple of these works I am going to draw from in this presentation, but there's just this fabulous body of excellent research out there. So One of the things that I really want to impart, and I am talking sort of generals here, I'm not talking specifically about our Board of Supervisors, but these historians and political scientists and sociologists, and there's even a journalist up there, what they have kind of found and argued is that the coal fields in particular, and it's not solely unique to here, but we do tend to have what people would refer to as oligarchic governments, right? They tend to pass on power through families, right? We can all identify a few names that probably appeared back in the Board of Supervisors in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and maybe even the 1870s, I don't know, but power tends to get passed on. These are landowners. They may have access to a lot of resources in the county. They may be party to development that comes from higher state levels. They've got connections to people in state seats of power, right, in Richmond or in Lexington or in Charleston, West Virginia. And so it's not to say, again, that they're exclusively that way or things haven't changed over time, but there does seem to be a tendency, as Wally mentioned, that they assume that they can make decisions, right, outside of the view of the public, right, that there are decisions that tend to be made maybe behind closed doors, and then they present us with the option, right, one option, or maybe not so great second option. So a lot of that decision making, those tendencies, those oligarchic tendencies date back. One of the books up there, The Road to Poverty, they date it back to settlement, European settlement in Eastern Kentucky. There are families in certain counties that have basically passed on power over and over and over again through the generations, and you can still find them in power now, right? So there are these political systems in place who do tend to see themselves as being, right, the appropriate people to make decisions about the economic development of their county. That may or may not have benefit for the rest of the citizens. Sometimes it can, sometimes it doesn't, right? It may generally benefit them and their own particular interests. The other thing that I really want to mention, really want to emphasize, is when we look at industrialization, 1870s, 80s, 90s, and especially that period where we saw the map of land ownership that Sharon, right, 20% is actually in like public, in the open market. The rest is federal or Penn, Virginia or something. So that dates back to that industrialization period where the narrative goes that outside coal interests bought up this land. But you have to sit there and ask yourself also, who was here on the ground that helped them do that, right? So we tend to think of as people in Philadelphia or New York or Texas or Northern Virginia now, as the case may be. And they certainly are a big part of that. But they also needed to have lawyers who were on the ground. They needed to have landowners who were on the ground. They needed to have people who knew other people, right, locally, who could get them access to purchasing coal mineral rights and gas rights and that kind of thing. So it's really important not to overlook the local power structure and the role that they played in the industrialization process and sowing the seeds of the conditions that we're dealing with now. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. I can say more about that maybe in the Q&A. So I do want to talk about one book up here that is especially important to understanding how these local political systems work and how they operate in such a way to kind of perpetuate their power and control over economic decision making. And that's the one that would be on your left, Power and Powerlessness by John Gaventa. Some of you may actually be familiar with it. He is actually on a new book tour of Appalachia right now. So if you get to catch him, he was in West Virginia. He's going to be in Kentucky at UK. And so don't miss the chance, if you can, to listen to him. But this book is, it dates to 1982, but it has stood the test of time. And I'll just recap as best I can some of his points about, his observations about how county governments and local governments kind of operated to limit the options that were available to residents. And I'm not going to test you on this, but if you need me to go over it again later, I can. He's got like what he calls 3 dimensions of power, so 3 mechanisms through which local governments can wield power over their constituents. The first dimension is pretty straightforward. Elites are able to wield power and make decisions that affect their communities because they're politicians, right? They've got connections, they've got money, they've got resources, they've got lawyers, they know people in Richmond, right? I mean, this is just basically, if any of us get elected to office, we're gonna have people on the phone who might not listen to us otherwise, right? This is how politics works. So it's pretty straightforward. There also may be, in more rural communities, there may be name prestige. I know my folks come from Floyd and Patrick County, and I remember my grandma talking about the local people. They were from a good family because they were involved in politics, right? So you just kind of knew, right? And she probably deferred to those people to some extent. The second dimension of power then, he suggests that elites can actually, and this is what get to Wally's point, they can skew or limit economic development options and alternatives that are presented to the public as viable choices. So these are the kinds of decisions that go on behind closed doors, right? That they'll be on the phone with some company in Texas or some politician in Richmond or Washington. And basically these kinds of conversations take place out of the public eye. So yeah, by the time that the public hears about it, there's already pretty good investment going on. They've already done siting surveys and all of that kind of stuff. And so what they present to the public basically is well, this is the thing, right? This is the thing you all are going to have. This is what Gaventa refers to as the mobilization of bias towards one particular type of industry or one particular type of development. What's interesting is in the second dimension of power, they can also use other tactics to mobilize public opinion towards that if they face opposition. So for instance, they might say to somebody at the Board of Supervisors meeting, oh, well, you're just paid protesters. So basically what they're doing is trying to turn people's opinion against, right, turn the public's opinion against people who might oppose them. So that's mobilizing bias, right? So that's kind of how that works as well. This can also include more dramatic measures. So if all else fails, the county I study in West Virginia, unfortunately, had intimidation, threats, threat of burning down people's homes. I mean, it can actually take more extreme measures in certain cases. Red baiting, that kind of thing. Then there's the third dimension of power, which is when I learned this, it was a lot more difficult for me to wrap my head around. But basically, Gaventa suggests that elites benefit from social and psychological relationships that they develop within their communities or within their institutions, as the case may be, because I think Gaventa was also looking at the UMWA hierarchy in the 1970s, which had some rocky points over leadership, a lot of conflict over leadership. And so what he found when he was looking very closely at these power dynamics was that people in power could often sort of, I won't say manipulate, but because of the relationships they had with people who were maybe under them in some way, people would, their constituents would basically just say, okay, yeah, we're going to give you power over decision making. Just because of who you are and you are the decision maker, we will maybe relegate our own interests, you know what's best, right? I mean, these kind of come from personal relationships. And I think all of us can identify if you think about just interpersonal relationships, And so for a good example here, within the coal fields, observers like Gaventa, but others, have often described, and apologies to my medievalist colleague because he's going to get mad at me for saying this, but they have often described coal field politics, especially in the early 20th century, as feudal or medieval. Mother Jones said, "Medieval West Virginia," right? That's a famous line. And she's describing basically a system of power where the people in power act like nobility, right? They almost act like lords over everybody else. And so it's that sort of profound, extensive, almost unrecognizable if you're living in it, right, system of power. So I just wanted to give that overview because he lays this out very, very clearly in his research. But this is something to think about. It's a useful model, I think, when we think, we're interacting with a board of supervisors that may be more or less accommodating to public input, right? And so do with that information what you will, but I find it somewhat helpful here. So, okay, so just to move on then, how does this actually play out then? If we trace, this is a very brief history here, but I've got just a couple of image slides to show you all. So if we're going to go back to industrialization and trace, look kind of forward through industrialization to the 1950s, to the 1970s, to the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Basically what we see is more or less there is one option, right? There's one option being presented. It's coal. It's a different type of mining of coal. By the 70s, there's a little bit of diversification in the coal fields, but then it's coal again with the energy boom. And then in the era of globalization, things start to change, and so we get a different set of narratives about what is necessary, right, for economic development. So that's kind of where I'm going here, and of course, 1890s to 1920s, it's resource extraction. It's railroads. In order to build the railroads, you've got to have timber, and in order to mine coal, you have to have timber. So we've got a combination of coal development and timber development. Timber, of course, also shapes Western North Carolina and other non-coal producing places, but they have their own versions of mining as well, mica and that kind of thing. So everything from the legal system, the mechanism of the legal system to allow for corporate development changes. We go from an agricultural system that favored farmers and landowners to then a legal system that benefits corporations. I didn't put Ronald Lewis's work up there, but he's another historian who's written about this legal revolution that he taught that really reshaped Appalachia's economy in the 1880s and 1890s. And so, of course, if you all know anything about your history of feuds, right, Hatfield-McCoys and other feuds in eastern Kentucky, a lot of it actually was over control of resources during this really, it's not about a hog. It's actually about the control of resources in places like eastern Kentucky and the Tug Fork Valley, which is what's pictured here. Who's going to come out on top, right? Which lawyers, which landowners? They're all sort of middling, right? People, intermediaries in this larger process of economic development. And that's not to say, again, that we don't have people from outside who are very much party to this. So that I don't want to neglect that point. But these local officials, local intermediaries, local business owners, lawyers, landowners, they all play a role in this as well to try to come out on top in this dramatically changing environment. And so if you're a local farmer here in 1890, you're being told, coal is the thing, right? Coal is the one thing. You can harvest your timber, but it's all going to be about coal, right? That's basically what people would have been hearing at the time. And they talk about this as being inevitable, right? The march of progress. It's inevitable this is going to happen, so don't stand in the way. Any naysayers, right, would have potentially gotten hurt or gotten pushed out or faced other repercussions. Okay, so then, of course, I do want to mention also, so I end this up in 1920s because this is, Yeah, World War I, we're mining a lot of coal, and then all of a sudden, right, we put the brakes on. There's too much coal that was mined, and actually portions of the coal fields end up in depression before the depression hits. So things are already kind of hard through the 1920s, and of course through the 1930s, things get really bad for coal field residents and elsewhere. So there isn't really much in terms of economic development proposals going on, but we do see the federal government starting to intervene with various types of wage labor, infrastructure jobs, and that kind of thing. So moving on then, of course, coal does revive. It revives especially during World War II, which I've talked to folks who lived in, Norton and Appalachia, and the towns are just booming, right? This is sort of the heyday of this area. They've got movie theaters, they've got, recreation, they've got just shopping, shopping, clothes and cars, auto shops, the whole bit. And it looks like things are going to be really good. Ronald Eller, who was also up on that list of books, who wrote Uneven Ground, Appalachia, post 45 America, he talks about this period of World War II basically as a missed opportunity, right? He refers to it as growth without development. And so we're going to grow, and it's going to look like everything is really taken off and it's awesome. But then politicians at the local level failed to take it and then reinvest and diversify the economy. So West Virginia and Chemical Valley, it's kind of the same thing. Portions of eastern Kentucky, anywhere you have ordnance factories, like there's this missed moment because politicians, again, are like, they're going to do the one thing they're used to doing that they know is going to be a sure bet or they think is going to be a sure bet. So here is coal. So we're going to stick with coal. We're not going to reinvest, or we're not going to think that maybe coal someday might not be what, might not be pulling in the money that it once was. So then we get to 1951, and some of you may actually remember this, I don't know, or remember the fallout from this is that when we think about coal, we also have to think about the process of mechanization. And when I think about data centers, my brain goes to AI, right? I'm a knowledge worker, I'm a professor, and I'm sitting here wondering what AI is going to do to people like me in my profession later on. Maybe we're going to be irrelevant, I don't know. And I look at mining mechanization, and we've got an example of what can happen, right? There was an agreement between John L. Lewis, who's there in the picture, in the center there, the head of the UMWA, negotiating with the Coal Operators Association, and it sounded good. I mean, what he did was good. He agreed to allow for mechanization so we could have a system of hospitals and healthcare and benefits that miners really needed, right? It was a very important piece of legislation, but he also knew it was a devil's bargain, right? Because mechanization is going to result in job loss. And very quickly then, mechanization, the one thing, it's inevitable, it's the thing we've got to do. But of course, by 1960, right, our population starts to decline. And so you see a mass exodus of young people and working families going up to Cleveland and Cincinnati and Detroit and other places. This even does affect farming Appalachia. My dad is an out migrant. My mom was an out migrant. So there are other things going on as well. But mining mechanization being presented as the one thing, of course, doesn't also lead to sort of permanent economic redevelopment, right? So fast forward then, and I don't want to talk too much longer, but fast forward again, we get to the 1970s. This is after the war on poverty. And the war on poverty did lead to some economic development, diversification. I think, again, I don't know Wise County all that well, but I think there were a few factories here, maybe garment factories and things like that back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. Didn't tend to last terribly long. The county I study in West Virginia, same thing. They actually had a brassiere factory. Shoes, that kind of thing. But again, despite a little bit of diversification by 1973, 74, 75, 76, the nation needs energy. It needs a domestic energy source. And so again, you've got this sort of reinforcement in local politicians' mind that it's got to be all about coal. And so again, it kind of entrenches, right, the status quo is coal is it, right? It's the lifeblood. This is what we're going to stick with. And then, of course, they move away from those conversations about economic diversification. And so when we get into the 1980s to 2000s, this is where things get really bad. Right, just across the country, right? I think we all remember NAFTA. I actually grew up in Hickory, North Carolina, the furniture capital, and man, did it get hit. I was initially in textiles before I became a historian. That also got hit. And so across the country, deindustrialization, offshoring of industry just hit communities really hard. It hit first in the north, but certainly southern communities and coalfield communities also got hit really hard. And the way to think about that in the coalfield specifically is, of course, we do mining mechanization sort of translates to surface mining, and surface mining is a function basically to, the argument is to compete with cheaper coal coming from India and China, right? So we've got to mine coal as cheaply as possible because of this overseas competition. So what it also looked like for a lot of coalfield communities, jobs have dried up, populations have declined, and then all of a sudden the one thing becomes call center. We have a call center here, but Amazon there outside of Huntington, West Virginia, which unfortunately I think is going to close in May. So again, not a permanent form of development. It was a stopgap measure in this process of globalization where local officials working in conversation with state and federal determined that these, they were fundamentally lower wage jobs, right, were going to be what would fill the gap and what would lead Appalachia into the future. So I do want to read a quote here really quickly. I'll try to do this just from the side. But this is from Ron Eller's Uneven Ground, and this is what he says about this period. Rather than focusing civic energies on the improvement of housing, higher education, culture, recreation, and health facilities that would enhance the quality of life for local workers and encourage creativity and entrepreneurship, leaders continued, again, it's going back through this history that I've talked about, continued to look to external models of development that perpetuated old dependencies on outside markets and absentee capital, right? So this is really, again, what we're looking at now, the situation we have in Wise County and other communities, is the same pattern, right? You have local politicians who don't consult their constituents, they don't ask, they don't run surveys, they don't field input, and then they determine what is ultimately, they think, good for us, right? Good for the community. So it really is kind of the same situation. It may look a little different now because it's less about coal and more about data centers or something else, but it is grafting onto that energy tradition, that energy history. So, okay, the last thing I have here, so I do want to, I'm going to try to be like Wally. I'm a historian. We tend to look back on the past like, oh, and not think too much about the future necessarily, but I do want to end on an upbeat note because I have learned some things by studying activism and just knowing a little bit about different counties. And I think one of the things I do want to recommend to you all is look at other communities and what their political structures and systems and practices look like, because it's not all that far down the road from us that there is an economic development authority, and I'm not saying Floyd County is perfect by a long shot, but if you read that statement from Floyd County and compare it to our economic development authority, you can see that they have much more consideration. It's a more open government, right? More consideration of sort of the well-being of the community, fostering innovation, soliciting ideas and business energy and input from their constituents. They run surveys of the county residents all the time and field input from them. So whereas you look at Wise County and the vision, An abundant natural resource base consisting of all these resources, coal, gas, timber. These attributes make the county an ideal location for manufacturing, information technology, distribution, logistics, energy production, and data center operations, right there at the end. Whereas, again, Floyd County talks about growth through startups, expansion, attraction of businesses, and fundamentally, they're concerned about preserving a good quality of life for their constituents. So they have there at the end, preserving community character, growing within our resource capacity, preserving, respecting natural and agricultural resources. It just sounds a lot like they have a bit more concern for a very diverse economy and for encouraging small businesses in particular that, you know, when you think about a small business, and I will stop here in a second, what you end up having, right, are people who start businesses, potentially can pass it on to their heirs, right? Those businesses could grow and change over time, and they get rooted in the community, and the money comes back into the community. It doesn't go to Richmond, right, or it doesn't go to Texas or wherever. So it's just, I want to encourage you all, this is my last slide here, just a couple of things to think about, lessons as I've done research in the region that I think are important. Certainly become familiar with these patterns of anti-democratic behavior. Get to know them. If you are part of an organization or you have enough money, you can subscribe to newspaper databases that make research really easy, and you can do very quick and easy keyword searches to find out, is there something of a pattern among our Board of Supervisors or among certain politicians where they have acted this way previously? And I'm just going to give you a little hint that in the 1990s, there are some things that sound really familiar to this situation we're facing now. Even the tax issue. So just kind of become familiar with that history. I think it is useful and helpful in giving you kind of the framework and the language for calling out patterns, because that's going to help you challenge, right, those tendencies, those anti-democratic tendencies. Also question those narratives of inevitability. Is AI really inevitable? Are data centers inevitable? No, you can look across America right now and see all kinds of resistance to them in rural communities and urban communities. So, and as a historian, nothing is inevitable. It sounds like it because we're looking back on the past, but nothing is inevitable. There is always capacity for change. Organize locally, so make sure that you do attend the meetings and you do work with different organizations. Focus on the local, but also stay connected to those broader networks, especially if they're sharing a similar concern. Stay in communication with them. With Sharon's list of all the entities, sometimes higher levels of government can be the problem, but sometimes they can also offer solutions, especially if legislation might be pending. This might be a really advantageous moment to get on the phone and call Richmond or call our elected officials. And the last thing, I'm saying this as much for myself as I am for anyone else, but stay engaged. Make sure you're mentoring young leaders as well. Encourage young people to stay here if they can, if they're able. That's really important. And hold out hope that you will be able to shape decision making into the future. So I will stop there.
Thank you all. Okay, we had on the table out in the hall, you had an opportunity to write down any questions. I imagine that during these three presentations, questions have also occurred to you. So Jane is in the back. Do you have your microphone? Because I've got one up here if you want it. Has anybody got a written question that you want one of the panel to address? Jane will come by and pick that up. Or if questions have occurred to you, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and Jane will bring the microphone to you so that you have a chance to ask your questions. If you have concerns that you want to voice at this time, please share those as well. Okay. Oh, that's sweet. The first card that I am going to read is, "Thank you all, excellent presentation." Thank you. That's very kind of you. Okay, I have a question here. What do you think about the 5 ultra-billionaires that want to dominate the world, maybe through AI? What do you think about that? The 5 ultra-billionaires that want to dominate the world. What do you think about the 5 ultra-billionaires who want to dominate the world, maybe using AI?
Ugh.
Jenny just spit it right out.
I'll just echo what I said before, that nothing is inevitable. It is very important to make it a daily mantra that nothing is inevitable, and there is tremendous power in the people.
In the coalition of,
Yeah.
Sharon?
Yeah, we haven't talked about AI tonight, and one of the myths is, and we actually were in a meeting where people said, or they were asked, how many of you use Facebook? How many of you use the internet? How many of you watch Netflix? See, you're all dependent upon data centers, and our society is. But the data centers we've had since maybe even the 90s, the internet certainly took care of most of that. What AI is doing, and the onrush to bring in more and more and more data centers, and not like the one at Mineral Gap, but we're talking, they call them hyperscale data centers, and there needs to be clusters of them. That's one of the reasons they like rural areas. They're moving into our land. But AI is perpetuating this onrush of more and more data centers. Now, I'm sure we all have different opinions about AI, and there are good things we hear about in science and medicine and the way AI can help, but we also know there can be downsides in many, many ways. So what we need to understand is it's AI that is now creating this onrush of data centers. And I will just tell you my personal, what has driven me to participate. We're not going to stop the global nuclear industry, and we're not going to stop data centers. But if we feel that data centers and nuclear energy should not be here on our land, using our water, and bringing in even more polluting energies, then we can stop it here.
I'll piggyback off of something she said. Go ahead. I think she mentioned something really important when that comment was made about, how many of you use Facebook, how many of you use the internet. It's never really said explicitly, but the implication with that is, well, you have no business talking about concerns with AI because you use the internet or you use, AI for something. I think that comes to something, and I might be stealing some of Jenny's thunder here with the history of the region, is that, over and over again, and I've heard this throughout my career, I work in the environmental field, so people will say, you care about the environment, so you don't want to see the county succeed economically. And that's not the case at all. I mean, I live here, I'm a resident, I don't want to see the county crash and burn economically. So I think a lot of times we're presented with this false dichotomy of, either you care about the environment or you love AI, and there's no, middle ground. Middle ground may not be the best word, but, finding that nuance and having those conversations about, well, yeah, we're probably in a world now where AI is not going away, but that doesn't mean we should just set aside all of our environmental concerns when somebody wants to build a data center. I think it's really important not to fall into that trap when we hear folks in positions of power telling us to ignore our concerns because, there's economic benefits with a certain project, if that makes sense. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. There's not just an either-or type of situation that we have to deal with any kind of industry. We have to ask critical questions about it.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say that is an excellent example of mobilization of bias, too, a strategy. It's one or the other, right? Those are the choices we have. So the other thing I'll say really quickly is that I think when I say that there seems to be a lot of sort of citizen civic concern right now and pushback to data centers, but also to AI generally, that we are kind of in a moment where I think there are, and it's taking some time, but some federal officials who are starting to recognize the need to put guardrails up around the use of AI. Certainly there's a lot of concern about the weaponization of AI and mass surveillance and all that kind of stuff. So if you think about that particular conversation as being one part of the conversation that people, in communities have about what is it going to do to our land base, what is it going to do to, are people going to want to move here if we have data centers, So I think there is a lot to kind of tap into that may actually lead to some positive legislation. So I am trying to be hopeful about that.
And to the billionaires, they can put it in space, which is one of the suggestions they're making.
I've read that. And the same question card has, and you've, I think, addressed this to a certain extent, the threats to the existence of humanity that these data centers present. And with that, anyone who has been following AI is aware of the effects on air and water and our environment, just to name a few. Would you please explain for us what heat domes or heat islands are? Because that's another component of AI that our audience may not be as aware of because it doesn't get the exposure that the others get.
You want me to take that one? That sounds like a nerd question, so I'm happy to answer that. So I grew up in the North Georgia mountains. I didn't grow up in Wise County. I've lived here for about 15 years, and I mentioned that because long before data centers were a thing, the city of Atlanta was really known as a heat island because when you've got, in that case, a lot of what we call impervious surfaces, but concrete and asphalt, that kind of thing. You don't have a forest, you don't have natural land cover that can absorb some of that heat and then, emit it more slowly. That heat gets trapped, and then you have this local area that's a lot warmer than the surrounding environment. There's a study, I think, just the last week or two that has come out, looking at data centers and that role that they're playing, because especially like in Northern Virginia, where you've got a whole bunch of these clustered together, they do have concrete, they do have some of those materials that can hold heat, but they're emitting a lot of heat because of just the simple, electrical power they're using, the servers that they're using. So that can increase the local temperature around those data centers, and that has impacts on the plant life, the animal life, air quality. If it's big enough, even weather. Places like the city of Atlanta can actually influence the weather patterns there. So there's kind of a Pandora's box there if you start changing that long term, what that can mean for the local area. So that's kind of where that comes from with data centers. It's more the heat they're emitting, and if you cluster them all in a given area, what is that going to do to the local temperature patterns, which is obviously a huge concern. Thankfully we're not there yet. We just have the one data center out near the tech park, but if you start clustering a lot together, I don't know what the threshold is for some of those studies where you start to have points of concern, but it would definitely be something, the long-term horizon for us if we become a big center for those.
And Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Brian Phelan, during his presentation, not this past Board of Supervisors meeting, but the one prior to it, didn't he say something about the plan is for 9 buildings at Elam Farms with the gas generators for each one. So with that kind of concentration of data centers, the heat issue is going to become exponentially larger and extend farther out.
And what really worries me about, the gas plant approach is the heat. And then also, like I mentioned in my remarks, that particulate matter that's released, that's a huge concern. Whether it's a gas plant associated with a data center or just a plain old gas plant, there's trade-offs with that kind of energy generation. If we're putting those not out in some far-flung place, but behind a subdivision, next to a school, there's all sorts of potential issues there. And that kind of concerns me that we're maybe being a little naive about that, I think, right now as a county, assuming that there's not going to be serious issues that come out of that. We've got to have those conversations. And as far as I've seen right now, we're not having those, at least at the public level. We're just kind of, moving along and not raising those concerns.
Sir?
We're from Northern Virginia. We're around a lot of data centers. You don't have enough water here for 9. You don't have enough water for small
Right,
reactor.
right.
Because you have runoff that comes off a small reactor. That has to go somewhere. You don't have that in these pictures I'm looking at. The science that you have here, it won't work.
Thank you, thank
So
you.
we have one in Maryland. You have runoff. You have to get water out of Potomac.
Right.
You have to have water. This stuff talking about getting water from Wise, it's not going to work.
Welcome to our world.
Sorry. That's what you need to tell these people.
Well,
It's not
would,
gonna work.
I'll drive you if
Don't
you'll,
have enough water.
if you'll come to the next Board of Supervisors meeting, I will give you a ride.
You don't have enough water.
Thank you.
That's
We,
one you guys, that's it. But
All right.
9, no way.
right, well, that's the proposal is 9. Going along with that, where did I see it? What about the surrounding areas? What happens to the water that is collecting the heat? People have spoken, and I know we haven't specifically addressed it this evening, but there has been talk of a closed-loop system that will eliminate any potential poisoning to our water system. And I believe that has been debunked on a number of levels. Would you address that, Wally?
Yeah, I would love to see the details on that. I think going back to what I mentioned in my remarks, I can't, as a scientist, maybe setting aside my elected position for a minute, I've got to have data and evidence to make an informed decision about those kind of things. And just hearing there are closed loop systems is not enough. I need to hear, what is that system like? Where's the water going to come from? What's the quantity of water that we're talking about? If it's a closed loop system, is it entirely closed loop, or is there water that's going to be used for other purposes? As far as I'm aware, and I may have missed something, but those points have not come up so far in any of the public meetings I've been to, Board of Supervisors meetings, the news articles we've seen. There's a lot of assurances that I've heard, but in the world that I work in, you have to show me, not tell me, for me to make a decision. And, unfortunately, we just don't have the information, I think, right now to know, which is the biggest problem to me.
Exactly.
But,
We
Yeah.
haven't been provided with the information.
Again, at our meeting with Senator Pillion, this is one of the questions he said to us. Well, what about the closed loop system? So we're hearing that. Well, what about this? And as Wally mentioned, exactly what is it? How is it working? And one of the things we're hearing, again, and we need to, I agree, always see the data, is that if you're recycling this water, but some of it is being evaporated, which means water loss, but you have the buildup of chemicals, even forever minerals, okay? And those eventually have to be flushed. And they're toxic, and that can go back into your either wastewater system that is not prepared to take care of that, or back into your water. So you will hear people say, what about the closed loop system? I would ask them, you tell me, how does it work? I think that's where we're at right now.
And no one on the Board of Supervisors has the answer to that question. If they have the answer, they're not sharing. Okay. Kathy, you this is your question. Please, if I don't get this right, would you please correct me, because I'm not 100% certain that I'm understanding. The size of the particulate matter from the gas plants, is it a measurable size? Can you, excuse me, if I'm standing in a field and the diesel engines are sending out the particulate matter, can I see it on my skin? Can I see it on my clothes? Because I know it's going to go in my lungs.
Yeah, the particulate matter of concern, and I know Kara's here, she may know more than me, I'm not putting you on the spotlight, but App Voices has done some work monitoring some of that particulate matter, and I forget the size. Is it PM 2.5? Does that sound familiar? Don't quote me on that, but there's a certain size of particulate matter that is a concern because you don't see it, so you're not going to see smoke, you're not going to see smog, that kind of thing, and that's the stuff where those particles are so small they can get into your lung tissue, and that's when the problems come up. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would love to learn more about what they're planning, because to go back to my point about the water, all we've heard so far is a gas plant is going to power this. So what kind of gas plant, how many turbines are we talking about? What's the pollution control technology? Where is it going to be located? All of those things are what we need to know to make those kind of decisions. Just a gas plant is not enough. So it sounds like from what we've heard, there's a lot of movement behind the scenes to bring one here, but this kind of meeting needs to happen where somebody who knows that information that's part of the project team can tell us so that we can make comments, we can make informed decisions, because right now, all we're hearing is a gas plant, and we don't know what kind of potential risk or benefits could come from that. But yeah, you're right. I think, monitoring is important. The work I mentioned App Voices is doing, just to shout them out, right outside my building at the college, they've got Purple Air Monitor. There's a program where they have a little small monitor that's about, the size of like a baseball, and it's monitoring for that kind of particulate matter. So there's work already looking at that. So I think if and when that does happen, the infrastructure could be there locally to detect changes, which would at least help us, know what's happening. But.
Kathy, use your microphone, please.
I was said actually DEQ should be doing the air monitoring. When there was the One Air study, Vivian Thompson from UVA, she's retired now, but environmental policy, she covers that in her book, Climate of Capitulation. When that air study was done just outside of Appalachia, we had never had any air monitoring in Wise County done by DEQ. Mm-hmm. That was their answer to us. When we were looking for historical data, they said, well, it's not been monitored. When I asked why, they said, well, we monitor it in Bristol, so we figure if it's okay in Bristol, it's okay in Wise County. I'm going, Bristol don't mind coal.
That's one of my soapbox issues is working as a scientist. There are so few historical data that we can use here to make comparisons across the board. With air and water quality, I'm a wildlife biologist for my day job. We lack the data to monitor wildlife trends, so it's a huge, huge impediment to analysis here, unfortunately.
But we would, in the case that those things are transparent or getting in the works, there would be air permit applications and arguments over just how important the quality of our air is,
yep.
In addition to our water. Thanks.
Question over here.
Yeah, this question is a little all-encompassing. I think it piggybacks really well off of the previous question and the points that were just being made. But we've talked a lot about kind of the struggle of being heard and being invited into these conversations, and it seems like we're still just going to end up kind of begging for someone to give us the opportunity to do that. You know, we're still not making those decisions for ourselves. So I wonder, and this is probably something any of you could speak on, and I hope I'm a little bit ignorant to it myself, so that's why I'm asking. But would it be prudent for us to focus on proactively passing legislation to protect our environment, requiring these companies to set up monitors before they begin any kind of construction or anything to start gathering that data, things that will kind of protect us before we have to ask them what kind of hazards they're trying to bring to us? Because I feel like otherwise we're just going to kind of continue this kind of reactive struggle where we're just kind of still having to take, while it isn't inevitable, and I feel very strongly about AI that way in data centers, I feel like suffering the consequences of folks who are already kind of working behind closed doors is inevitable unless we're able to protect ourselves with some other kind of legislation before they get moving and start developing. I mean, obviously they're doing a lot of speculative stuff at the moment. So I hope my question is comprehensible. Sorry, thank you so much.
Was that about proactive?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to address a certain segment of the question and the concerns that you just shared with us. This is the beginning for us, right here tonight. And I know we're a small group, but we're mighty. And what we need to do when we leave here tonight, I've got a small list of things I'm going to ask every person in this audience to do. And one of those is going to help us move this forward and gain control. We'll never have complete control, but ideally we will have some control just by putting pressure on our elected officials. We will gain some control over the decision-making process, whatever color that is. We will, if we assert ourselves, we will gain some control. I think to a person, everyone in this county, well, most people, have reached a point where we clearly understand the shortcomings of our elected officials in this county. And we need to stay on that. We need to stay in their faces. We need to let them know we're not going to passively accept the kind of decisions that are made behind closed doors. Those days are done. We're going to stand up and we're going to advocate for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren and our pets and our agriculture and our livestock. We're going to advocate for all of that. But I think that I've got some steps at the end, specifically that I'm going to ask you to take, and hopefully that will answer your question more. But do any of you have anything else to offer her?
I was just going to say about regulations. For several of the past years, there's been hundreds of bills introduced in the legislature to regulate data centers, and basically none of them have passed. Our elected officials, again, both parties, again, our movement is nonpartisan, but they have not passed regulations. A couple were passed last year. They were vetoed. Very few have gone through this year, but we need to work at the local level to get our counties to set up regulations for any of these developments.
I'm not sure who it was. I think I know who some of the people. Sharon, you were one of the people. There was a list created that, if any of you remember the big meeting, it was the tax increase meeting that was held at Central High School. And, hi Bonnie. And most of the people that evening were there because of the taxes. But then toward the end of that evening, a group of people got up and started asking questions and voicing concerns about the data centers. That night, I came prepared with a list that is 3.5 pages of questions specific to data centers in Wise County. And I presented a copy to each one of the board members. Those are the kinds of questions, they're very specific questions. Those are the kinds of questions that we intend to get answers to. And we have to move forward before a shovel breaks the ground. Because once that happens, we're behind the 8 ball. So we have to stay ahead of this. But there are questions that need to be answered before any forward movement happens.
If I can jump in real quick on
Yes.
and just emphasize something Sharon mentioned about legislation. You know, she mentioned there's a number of bills that have been filed in Richmond to try to kind of rein in data centers, and some of those I think are site assessments before a data center can be built. There's, you know, monitoring with air quality monitoring and water quality monitoring. Something that kind of concerns me since I've been not in the Richmond world, but kind of having more of my ear to the ground with how those bills are made, is that a lot of times, not necessarily with data centers, but with other stuff, the approach of the folks in Richmond is, you know, well, we'll regulate it more in Northern Virginia or in eastern parts of the state where that industry already exists, but we'll clear the way for it to move into Southwest Virginia because they need the money. And I think that happens a lot of times, not really as a nefarious thing, but because the decision makers in Richmond don't hear from the people here. They hear from kind of the country club scoping that I mentioned before. Those are the voices they hear from, and of course they're saying we want to bring this here because they're, you know, pro-industry, that's the world they work in. So I think having more of a voice from the people here to those elected officials in Richmond, knowing what the concerns are, could help with that and hopefully head off some of the, send the stuff that Northern Virginia doesn't want to see to Southwest Virginia and just put it there, if that makes sense. So I think more of a voice in Richmond each session is good, if y'all have those concerns.
And leading up to that, we also have another question. At the April 9th town hall, oh, no, that's not it, sorry, jumping ahead. Dwayne Yancey, a reporter for Cardinal on April 15, suggested that Governor Spanberger believes, and I quote, rural Virginia wants data centers. She states, quote, ending tax incentives will deprive them of an opportunity right when it's within their grasp. How do you respond to that? Look behind you, Kathy. Yes, you
In
did.
addition to that, I wrote down,
Yes.
should we be calling the governor's office?
Yes, every day. Put it on your list of things to do. Would anybody like to respond to the quote from Governor Spanberger?
Yeah, I'll just kind of go back to what I said about how, you know, county politicians are the ones getting on the phone to the governor's office, and so it is local politicians or regional development districts. I mean, they all have the governor's ear. So it is really important for us, if we're concerned, to actually call the governor's office, not just, you know, call our Kilgores or whoever, but to actually call the governor. So she does hear something else. So, yeah, I mean, definitely work the state level as well. It's important.
And-
Maybe we should send her a copy of this live feed.
We can do that. We have the tech. Don't be disappointed if you call the governor's office and you've got your heart set on speaking to her. Please don't get discouraged if you end up speaking to someone who works for her. Keep it up and keep doing it, because eventually, if our voices are heard in Richmond, because we know that our local elected officials are not sharing our message to Richmond, we need to be the ones making those phone calls and not depend on someone else to do it for us. I have one. Who did the two-side? Whose is this that Jane handed to me? Okay. I don't know who this is, but I'm going to, toward the end here, and we're this close to being finished. I think these questions that you've put on this paper are going to at least be somewhat answered, and if they're not, please raise your hand. Let's see, Kathy, I think I got your questions. Kathy, did you have any other question or comment that you wanted to make? Microphone.
One of the others was just a suggestion. I suggest that we invite the entire Board of Supervisors to do a site visit and invite the citizens to join them. I think we should do that. They will probably say no, but we should ask anyway. And maybe we should ask over and over again, because when we place ourselves in a place, it's like saying where and when. So when we place our bodies in a place, we say, here we are. Now we want to talk about where we are, what this is.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. One more quick question. At the April 9th Town Hall, I was there with Peters and Boardwine. It was a trip. At the April 9th Town Hall, hosted by District 4 Supervisors Rusty Peters and Tim Boardwine, Peters asked, and I quote, "If not data centers, then what?" As it relates to the financial mess Wise County is currently experiencing. How would you address that?
Can I jump in with one real quick?
Yes.
It goes back to something that I mentioned, and it's maybe not a if data centers then what kind of thing, but when I had that flow chart up of kind of my perfect world of how civic engagement could work, what I think about is the early days, and some of y'all were in the room for that, of the Clinch River Valley Initiative, which was a big economic development project that's kind of on the rocks right now, but it started, I think, in 2010. If you're not familiar with it, that's something that came out of a really grassroots movement, like a meeting like this, where folks were looking at the economic situation and saying, what can we do to address that? And I mentioned that because the way that whole initiative worked, that's how we got Clinch River State Park, is how a lot of the development in downtown St. Paul happened. That happened by having the elected officials, the government officials in the room with everyday citizens and having a process where if you came in with concerns or an idea, you would not just have an opportunity to voice those, but you'd probably leave with a leadership role in that initiative. And so I think rather than, if not data centers, then what? I would like to see that approach just more. For some reason, around 2018, 2019, we quit doing that. You don't see public meetings anymore at all about much of anything unless it's required by law. Whereas there was a period about 10 years ago where those were commonplace, and you'd hear all sorts of initiatives and ideas bounced off the public. Something happened, I don't know if it was politics, I don't know if it was outside money, influence from Richmond, but we just quit doing that. And so my response would be, let's get back to that, whether it's data centers or something else, and have those conversations, because I think that's really how we find solutions for the community. And we're in a tough place financially, but we're going to have to get out of it together as opposed to just, hoping that someone comes in and takes care of it for us.
Exactly. Sharon, did you have something you wanted to share? Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Wally, and I appreciate you sharing that there is actually a recent history model for that.
Yeah, we can look to history for that.
But it's like I was saying too, our communities are doing things, and I think even just, conversation with citizens, but certainly with some of the town councils, they have a lot of energy, a lot of vision for what they want to see their own communities doing. I've heard it at some of these recent board meetings, people are asking questions about, well, what about small-scale farming? What about, I know manufacturing is difficult, but, we are in a moment where we are, as a country, trying to ask questions about how to bring it back. So why is that not actually being discussed at the local level? And we have lots of historic examples of manufacturing of various natural resources here, wood products and tanner. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we could maybe draw inspiration from as well. And just really quickly, I said I was from Hickory, North Carolina, and that is precisely what Hickory just announced that they're doing because they lost their furniture industry. That they are really interested. They do have a lake, and they have bike and hike paths, and they've revitalized their downtown. But they were looking at that furniture tradition and trying to figure out how to revitalize their manufacturing base based on that tradition. So now they're actually going to be soliciting manufacturing of like outdoor gear, which I thought was really kayaks and canoes and things like that is in that tradition. And I think that's just an example of creative thinking that if you if you consult, residents of the county, they're going to have ideas, even if they don't have the money. But that's
Right.
what government's for, is to help you find the money. We've got the Appalachian Regional Commission. We've got other grant programs for coalfield development. It doesn't have to just be data centers.
I think part of the problem is we have a group of people in charge in Wise County who have been in this position for years, decades. And I think in the beginning, maybe they had an imagination and maybe they had the ability to think outside the box, but they've lost it. They don't have any imagination to investigate. I see all the small towns. I see the restaurants in Big Stone Gap. I see Little St. Paul opening up the Lyric Theater for not just movies, and I'm not even sure they do movies anymore, but they have a venue for people to come in and hear entertainment, or to just rent the venue for whatever reason. These little towns are working on things, is my point. And I think we have become immune to the idea that we can make changes ourselves, that we have that innate ability. We have the brains, we don't necessarily have the money, but we have the imagination, we have the brains, and we have the gumption. And I don't think we should be depending on people who have lost sight of the potential in Wise County and who are willing to fall back on the first quick fix, i.e. a data center, that comes across the board. I think we need to make those changes ourselves. I think that's the only way it's going to happen. Jane?
Hey, y'all. I just moved back to Big Stone Gap, which is wild. And I just know that, for one thing, how is this supposed to feed into the Gem of Virginia thing that I keep seeing all the time about Big Stone Gap? And for me, part of why I want to live here is because it's so rooted in these natural resources. And from across the mountain in East Kentucky, when I skipped over there for a while, that people talk about Wise County's economic development and its tourism development around natural resources as a model for the rest of the country and the region especially. So my question is sort of why, and I have been a part of and seen the enthusiasm, the excitement, the energy, the ideas that people in these communities are generating around economic development that's tied into the mountains and the rivers and the waterways. There is actually a lot of community energy and a lot of community enthusiasm that has been shifted into economic capital based on those concepts. And so this feels like, wow, the opposite of that. And I don't understand even how we got to that place here. I just think it's very surprising to me as someone who just moved back to this area and really cares about the environment here and the natural recreation opportunities, frankly. But also, there are so many other communities engaged in this conversation, to say very politely, in this conversation right now. And so I would love to think about, as a community, how we do two things. One, which is shift the conversation about our economic future away from this idea, right, back towards something productive that's already working, that we have the groundwork for, that has legs and is already running, right? But also, how do we connect with and get into stronger formation with other communities who are also engaged in this really hard conversation? Because there is a lot of community power and a lot of community wisdom, both from communities who are also facing data centers, but also from communities who have already had them, and so are experiencing the noise problems and the orange water, which is come on, we've already had orange water so long. We don't want it anymore. We're trying to fix that.
And that's what we're telling them.
And so my question is sort of how do we begin to engage in that broader conversation with like more and more communities, because there's so much strength in numbers and there's so much strength in communities coming together to solve these problems themselves. Yes, check, sorry. I love a good chat.
And I will say, Annie, to your point, there are a lot of points of collaboration between the folks who are working to bring data centers. You know, there's whole conferences built around how do you bring data centers to your community. So those conversations are happening on one side of the equation, but you know, what's that other side, and how do we get both of those groups in the room? How do we get both of them mobilized to have those conversations? I mean, it's not happening right now. So, yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying I agree with what you said.
Do you want to mention that Reimagine Appalachia?
About networking and working
Yeah.
together? Yeah. So, like, right here in the Cole counties, as I mentioned, everything has been focused on Wise County. But for instance, I used to live in Lee County. I was contacted by people in Lee County and very concerned because their land is karst, caves and such, and bringing data centers there. And questions were being asked, what about NDAs, non-disclosure agreements? And in fact, I think one of the residents, we're competing with a lot of other meetings tonight. The Lee County Board is meeting, and one of the residents was going to just ask, have you signed NDAs about data centers? In Scott County, we know that their economic development guy attended a data conference in New York just a couple of weeks ago. So the other counties are starting to think about it. Withville, we've talked to people with there. It's already happening there. Again, the people knew nothing about it. They're coming in and constructing for data center in Wythe County. Botetourt, county, that's just above Roanoke. Google has already bought land there and beside their water reservoir. And this has already happened, and the people are very upset. So one of the things, we got a call from Pulaski County. So it's starting to happen a lot here in Southwest Virginia, the greater. And one of the things we have talked about is we all need to be working together.
Exactly.
So Southwest Virginia, not just far Southwest, but needs to have a voice that we present to Richmond.
Exactly.
If I can say one more quick thing, and then I'll shut up.
No, you don't have to shut
up. This past winter, every year, the soil and water directors get together for a state meeting in Richmond, and kind of what Sharon was mentioning, that was the topic of the meeting. This year, it wasn't supposed to be, but the folks from those communities, like she mentioned, like Botetourt, some of their folks were there. They are up in arms about that because what they're seeing is they're having to react to a lot of the issues that come from the data centers as opposed to proactively addressing them, which is what our jobs are supposed to be. And even if you don't care about the environment, that's a fiscal responsibility thing, right? If you inadvertently create a lot of problems, it costs more money to clean that up than it would be to fix it ahead of time. So those discussions are happening at some of the government levels. So how do we connect those discussions with the community, the grassroots, the developers, the county officials? I think that's kind of the magic bullet right now, is to figure out how to do that. And I wish I had answers, but you saying that made me think I didn't mention, but there's a lot of conversation right now at the state level outside of Richmond happening about that too.
And I think we have some ideas. Where do we go from here? Number one, join and follow Southwest Virginia Nuclear Watch on Facebook and volunteer your time, whatever amount of time you can, to the data center movement. You all have a skill. It may be making a phone call. It may be writing an op-ed in one of the local newspapers. Whatever you can do, start by following Southwest Virginia Nuclear Watch on Facebook. Join the group. Number two, attend Board of Supervisors meetings. And please don't just sit quietly and listen to what goes on. Stand up, get up behind the lectern during public comment, and say something about data centers. It's one night a month. It's the second Thursday. It starts at 6 p.m. It is held at the School Board Education Building, 628 Lake Street in Wise. It's a once-a-month commitment. Tell the Board of Supervisors during the meeting, during the public comment, we don't want data centers in Wise County, and we're going to make sure that they don't land here. Make a statement. Ask the members of the Board of Supervisors publicly if they have signed non-disclosure agreements. They're not going to answer you, but here's my point. A non-answer is an answer, number one. And number two, it gets on the public record that that question is being asked by more than just one or two people. Also, the Board of Supervisor meetings are on YouTube. So the YouTube audience will see you standing there asking that question, and they will also see the dead silence and the stone faces of each member of the Board of Supervisors, and that will have an impact on everyone. I believe it will make more people either attend those meetings and fill that room and stand up and say something to the Board of Supervisors. They're not infallible. They're not all-seeing. They are human beings, and they are fallible. Number three, if you have any personal beliefs or comments about data centers, Board of Supervisors meeting is the place for you to stand up and do it. This is our community. This is our home. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere because we're going to stop the data centers. We're not going to allow this to happen. Whatever it takes, that's what we're going to do. And I really hope that all of you join us and you tell your family and your friends and your neighbors that we need their help as well. We're all in this together. We're also following other groups in Virginia and across the United States to see what actions they're taking, and we're sharing our ideas with them. We're exploring online petitions and potential referendums similar to the electric referendum that we had last November. That we won. We defeated, yes ma'am, we defeated the electric referendum. We can do it again. We can put our own referendum up there. We can make sure that they hear us as a community via the referendum. Finally, I want to thank the following people who helped make tonight possible. Sharon Fisher, Wally Smith, Jenny Turman, Jane Branham, Brandon up there in the control center, thank you, sir, for all of your help. Fleur Payne, our tech team, Fleur Payne, Adam Millay, and Brandon, excellent wonder wizards with technology. And everyone who spread the word of this meeting tonight, who are now part of our resistance. And finally, I want to thank all of you. I wish you had brought 20 people each with you, but that's okay. We will get the word out. Thank you for coming, and please know that this is our first step, but it is a tremendous first step, and we're not going to take no for an answer. Thank you.